I serve in the Navy, faced danger overseas, but nothing prepared me for the war I'd fight in my own neighborhood. When the HOA president stole my boat, I didn't get mad. I got the FBI. The sun was just peeking over the lake, painting the rippling water in shades of gold and amber. The air was crisp, the kind that woke you up better than any coffee. Jake Walters leaned against the wooden railing of his dock, mug in hand, watching a pair of loons glide silently across the surface. Life had finally slowed down, and he welcomed it with open arms. Jake was a retired Navy veteran. After 24 years of deployments, naval bases, and cramped bunks, he had earned every bit of peace and quiet he now enjoyed. He had moved to Willow Shores, a seemingly peaceful lakeside HOA community in northern Georgia, 5 months ago. His modest 2-bedroom lake house backed up to the water, and behind it, tied neatly to his personal dock, rested his pride and joy, Liberty. Liberty wasn't flashy. She wasn't some roaring speedboat with leather seats and beer coolers. She was a 20-foot aluminum fishing boat, reliable as sunrise, with a quiet motor and room for two. Jake had restored her himself, gave her fresh paint, installed new seats, and even etched her name onto the side. She was a memory of simpler times, a gift himself after decades of service. But Liberty had become the center of a quiet war Jake never asked for. It started innocently enough. A letter in his mailbox from the HOA, handwritten, no return address. Dear Mr. Walters, according to Willow Shores HOA Regulation 12.4b, watercraft are not to be visible from the street or from neighboring properties. Please remove the boat from the dock immediately. Jake raised an eyebrow. His dock faced a lake. No one could see the boat unless they were out on the water or hovering over his house in a helicopter. He shrugged it off and filed the letter away. He had lived through far worse than passive-aggressive notes. Then came another, and another, each one more aggressively worded, each one signed by the same name, Karen Blevins, president of the Willow Shores HOA. Jake had heard the name before. When he moved in, neighbors gave him the same warning they might give about a nest of wasps. Nice enough until you cross her. Karen was in her 50s, short blonde hair that looked like it hadn't moved since 2003, clipboard always in hand, and a permanent scowl. She ran the HOA like it was a federal agency. Jake had tried to reason with her once. He remembered the day clearly. 2 months ago, he knocked on her door, a massive oak thing with a sign that read HOA Matters Only. Please respect boundaries. And she opened it with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ms. Blevins, Jake said politely, I got your letters about the boat, but it's tied to my dock, on my property. It doesn't violate anything in the HOA bylaws I've read. She sniffed, as if he had brought the smell of fish with him. You're mistaken, she said crisply. Section 12.4b. Boats must be stored in enclosed spaces. We can't have the neighborhood looking like a marina. Jake folded his arms. That section applies to front yards and driveways. The boat is behind my house, on the lake, where it belongs. Karen narrowed her eyes like she was locking onto a target. Let's not play games, Mr. Walters. You may be new here, but I know the rules, and so will the fine committee. I suggest you comply before this becomes unpleasant. Jake nodded, offering her a thin smile. I've handled unpleasant before, ma'am. That had been the end of that conversation, but not the end of harassment. In the weeks that followed, Jake received 2 fines, $150 each, and a formal HOA summons, which he ignored. He reached out to other neighbors, hoping for support. Most of them sympathized, but whispered their concerns about getting on Karen's bad side. One man down the street, Tom, offered a nugget of insight. She's done this before. Tom muttered over a share beer on Jake's porch. Last year, she had a neighbor's chicken coop declared a fire hazard and got it removed. The woman's a bulldozer. Jake laughed it off then. Let her try. I'm not going anywhere. He underestimated just how far Karen was willing to go. The theft. It was early Saturday morning when Jake knew something was wrong. He stepped out of his house with his usual mug of black coffee, ready to greet the morning from his dock. But when he looked out over the water, his stomach dropped. Liberty was gone. The ropes that had secured her to the dock were cut, cleanly and deliberately. The dock was empty. Jake blinked, thinking he was still waking up. He dropped the mug on the deck, ceramics shattering into shards. He ran to the edge, scanning the water. No sign of the boat, no trail, no evidence, just the endless calm of the lake. And then he saw it, a note taped to his front door. He snatched it off the frame. It read, "You were warned, Mr. Walters. Sincerely, Willow Shores HOA." There was no signature, but the handwriting matched Karen's notes. Sharp, pinched, as though written in frustration. Jake stood there, the wind brushing against his face. A lesser man might have stormed across the street, banged on her door, and demanded the boat back. Jake? He walked back inside, sat down, took a breath. Then he picked up his phone. The first call. "Hello." The voice on the other end was groggy. "Tony," Jake said. "It's Jake. I've got a situation." Tony Maslin was an old Navy buddy, now a field investigator for the Department of Homeland Security. Tony had always joked he joined the agency because spying on white-collar criminals was less stressful than dodging missiles. Jake explained everything. The notes, the warnings, the fines. The boat, gone. "Sounds like theft," Tony said after a pause. "She thinks the HOA gives her immunity," Jake replied. "Well, it doesn't, especially if she took that boat off your property. That's a felony. I need help proving it." Tony chuckled. "I'm sending you a list of things to start collecting. I'll make some calls too." The waiting game. Jake spent the next 2 days calmly but methodically doing what Tony asked, documenting everything. He photographed the dock, the cut ropes, the HOA letters. He called the local police, who took a report but seemed reluctant to touch anything involving a civil HOA matter. But Jake wasn't playing this game in local court. He was building a bigger case. And while Karen strutted around the neighborhood with her clipboard, Jake quietly watched, waited, collected. The real storm was coming. He just hoped Karen enjoyed her boat while she still had it. 2 days had passed since Liberty vanished. The lake behind Jake's house was still calm, but a storm was brewing under the surface. Not in the sky, but in Jake's chest. Karen had crossed a line. This wasn't a fine or citation. This was theft, plain and simple. But what Karen didn't know, or maybe didn't believe, was that Jake was not a man who let things slide. Jake's house was now a quiet war room. Every inch of counter space in his small kitchen was covered in printouts, handwritten notes, photographs, HOA documents, and copies of past complaints. His laptop was open to an encrypted chat window. On the other end, Tony Maslin, his friend from the Navy, and now his secret weapon. Jake typed, "Jake, I've got the last 18 months of HOA financial reports." "Tony." "Good. Any odd purchases?" "Jake, check this out. See entry 4/12. Community Improvement Project, $48,200. "Tony, that's not a gazebo. Keep digging. I'll run her name in federal property records." Jake leaned back. He had spent hours combing through publicly available HOA records. The HOA didn't exactly make it easy, but with a little pressure and an anonymous request from a concerned resident, he got the documents. Karen had been president of Willow Shores HOA for 5 years, and in that time, the HOA's expenses had more than doubled. The problem? There was nothing in the neighborhood to show for it. No new park, no road resurfacing, no updated mailboxes, no landscaping overhaul. Where had the money gone? Jake had a suspicion, and it had a long, sleek hull and a fresh coat of paint. Karen's boat. That evening, Jake took a quiet drive out of Willow Shores. He followed the GPS coordinates Tony sent him earlier, a private dock 22 miles away on Arrowhead Lake, a more upscale marina with security gates and monthly slip rentals. Jake parked across the street in the gravel shoulder and pulled out a pair of binoculars. There she was. A boat, not Liberty in name, but close in build. It had a new paint job, navy blue with a thin white stripe. The name Miss Perseverance was stenciled in script on the side. But Jake recognized the hull. The scratch under the bow from where he once hit a submerged log. The slight tilt in the rear seat where he had replaced a bolt. This wasn't a coincidence. That was his boat, Jake snapped pictures from every angle. He captured the registration number, the dock slip ID, the hull design, even a blurry image of Karen stepping off the dock with a man in a dress shirt. Not her husband, not anyone from Willow Shores. Jake found her. New name, new paint. Tony, nice work. Send me everything. Jake, already did. What now? Tony, time to check Karen's closets. Let's see what else she's hiding. Peeling the onion. Over the next 48 hours, Jake worked like a private investigator. With Tony's guidance, he ran Karen's name through property records, tax filings, and state business licenses. The things they uncovered were enlightening. Karen Blevins, self-proclaimed rule enforcer and president of Willow Shores, had 3 shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada, a second home on Arrowhead Lake under the name Karen B., Investments LLC, no reported income outside of a vague consulting line item on tax records. Tony's voice was almost gleeful when he called that night. She's been laundering HOA dues, he said bluntly. Jake blinked. Say that again? She's padding the budget, siphoning funds into shell companies she controls, and using them to buy personal assets, like your boat. Jake was silent for a moment. Then, softly, how much? Tony exhaled. We estimate at least $300,000 over 4 years. Could be more. Jake stared out the dark lake. So my $7,000 fishing boat is just the tip of the iceberg. Exactly. And the theft of your boat? That gives us a tangible, recent crime. Something we can move on quickly. Jake's voice went cold. What do you need from me? Sit tight. I've already passed up the chain. They're sending a task force. You'll hear engines soon enough. Back at Willow Shores. Meanwhile, Karen strutted around the neighborhood as if she had just saved a kitten from a burning house. Clipboard in hand, mirrored sunglasses on, barking passive-aggressive orders to gardeners, and eyeballing trash bins that weren't properly aligned. She even walked past Jake's house the next morning, waving mockingly. No boat today, she called out with a smirk. Jake didn't respond. He was sitting on his porch, laptop in his lap, pretending to browse fishing gear. Inside, his phone buzzed. Tony, confirmed, search warrant approved. Target date, tomorrow morning. Jake, I'll have coffee ready. The calm before the raid. Jake spent the rest of the evening cleaning. Not because he needed to, but because it helped him focus. He cleaned the porch, swept the walkway, even trimmed his bushes. At 6 a.m. the next morning, he was up, dressed in jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and boots. He brewed a strong pot of coffee and sat on the porch, sipping slowly, eyes trained on Karen's mansion-like house across the street. By 6:45, the neighborhood was still asleep. At 7:03, the silence broke. 4 unmarked black SUVs rolled into Willow Shores in perfect formation. A sheriff's cruiser followed. 2 vans marked FBI. Federal Investigations Unit stopped in front of Karen's driveway. Men and women in jackets, armed and efficient, filed out. Jake didn't move. He took another sip of his coffee. Then came the knock. Karen's fall begins. Karen answered the door in a pink robe, hair in rollers, holding a mug that said, #BossLady. Her face twisted in confusion as the lead agent stepped forward. Karen Blevins? He said firmly. Yes? What is this? We have a federal warrant for your arrest on suspicion of mail fraud, embezzlement, and theft of property. Karen blinked, jaw slack. Excuse me? There must be some mistake. I'm the HOA president. The agent didn't flinch. You have the right to remain silent. Neighbors began emerging from their homes. One by one, curtains twitched. Garage doors cracked open. A small crowd gathered as Karen's wrists were cupped behind her back. I demand to speak to my lawyer, she shrieked. This is a violation of HOA protocol. Jake chuckled quietly into his cup. 2 agents entered her home. Another team headed to her garage. One agent peeled the HOA sticker off her luxury SUV and tossed it into an evidence bag. Boxes of files and laptops were loaded into the van. At 7:42 a.m., Karen was escorted into the back of the FBI vehicle. Her expression was part rage, part confusion, and part shock. Jake finally stood, stretched, walked back inside. Later that day, Tony called him just after noon. "She's going to crack," he said, already asking for a deal. "Her financial records are a mess. Multiple felony charges coming." Jake nodded. "What about Liberty?" "She's an impound for now. Once the paperwork clears, we'll get her back to you. The feds owe you more than a thank you." Jake smiled. "Just want my boat back." "You'll get her, plus something better piece." Jake hung up. For the first time in days, he felt light again. The war was nearly over. And Karen? Her empire was crumbling. It was surreal, like something out of a television crime show. Jake stood at his window, watching Karen Blevins, the mighty self-declared queen of the Willow Shores HOA, being escorted from her own front porch in handcuffs. And she was still shouting, "This is harassment. I want to speak to the HOA board. I am the HOA board." Agents didn't flinch. They moved in smooth, rehearsed motions, as if the scene had played out in 100 towns before. Jake wasn't surprised by her outrage. Narcissists rarely saw themselves as guilty. But he was surprised by the size of the audience. Nearly a dozen neighbors had gathered outside. People who had, until now, kept their heads low and their opinions quiet. They stood with crossed arms and widened eyes, whispering as the FBI boxed up the empire Karen had built on threats, fines, and intimidation. Mrs. Hargrove from 2 doors down muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." Jake finally stepped outside, coffee in hand. Same mug, same porch. Only today, the morning was a little sweeter. Inside the investigation. Later that day, Jake received a secure call from Tony. "She cracked," Tony said. "Didn't even last 6 hours in the interview room." Jake raised an eyebrow. "That quick?" "She thought she could out-talk the feds like she does her HOA meetings. That backfired. She lawyered up eventually, but not before admitting to misappropriating HOA funds and forging votes on spending resolutions." "Do they have enough to indict?" "Oh, they're well past that. She's being charged with wire fraud, mail fraud, tax evasion, theft of personal property, obstruction of justice. She'll be lucky if she only does 10 years. Jake exhaled slowly. "And my boat?" "It was listed under a Shell LLC, which Karen admitted was fake. Once the paperwork clears, it's yours again. In fact, we've got it at the local impound lot already." Jake smiled. Karen's hidden world. As the feds combed through her home and digital life, the truth spilled out like oil from a cracked engine block. Karen hadn't just been embezzling HOA funds. She had turned it into a full-blown lifestyle. The HOA collected annual dues from 147 homes, totaling nearly $120,000 a year. Most of that was supposed to go to landscaping, neighborhood maintenance, and community improvements. Instead, Karen had used those funds to lease her brand-new Lexus SUV, rent a slip at Arrowhead Marina under a company, Blue Blevins Ventures LLC, buy furniture, high-end clothes, and even cosmetic surgery, all disguised as office upgrades and consultant fees. Host retreats for board training in Florida, where she was the only attendee. She even billed the HOA for her dog's grooming, listing the budget as property perimeter pest control. Jake shook his head when he read the summary Tony forwarded him. "Can't make this stuff up," Tony had said. "She thought she was running her own little kingdom. And when you didn't bend the knee, she made it personal." The community reacts. The next HOA meeting, just 1 week later, was the most well-attended in the neighborhood's history. Normally, these meetings drew 5 or 6 bored homeowners. But now, folding chairs had to be brought out to accommodate the crowd of nearly 50 residents. The meeting was held in the small community center near the entrance of the subdivision. There was no Karen, no clipboard, no smug face demanding order. Instead, an interim committee had been formed. 3 level-headed residents voted in by emergency ballot. Jake showed up, quietly taking a seat in the back. Tom, the same neighbor who had warned Jake early on about Karen, stood up to speak. "Folks," he said, clearing his throat, "we owe a debt of thanks to someone who refused to get pushed around. Someone who stood up to the bullying and exposed what was happening behind our backs." All heads turned to Jake. He looked mildly uncomfortable, lifting a hand to wave it off. I just wanted my boat back. Laughter rippled through the room. Tom added, well, we got a whole lot more. They voted to permanently remove Karen from any HOA involvement, dissolve her previous policies, and hire a third-party firm to audit the community's accounts moving forward. Transparency, fairness, and resident input were the new pillars. For the first time, people clapped at an HOA meeting. The return of liberty. 3 days later, Jake drove to the county impound lot with a knot of anticipation in his chest. A federal officer walked him through the rows of vehicles, SUVs, sedans, even an old ice cream truck, until they reached a wide gate with boats parked behind it. And there she was, Liberty. The new paint had been stripped, revealing the familiar gunmetal gray Jake had chosen himself. Her name, once covered by Karen's false branding, was repainted clean and proud in black cursive on her side. A few scratches and minor scuffs remained, but she was whole. The officer handed Jake a clipboard. Sign here. Jake did, gripping the pen a little tighter than usual. Do you want to press further charges? Jake looked at the man. The FBI's got her. I'm not greedy. I just want her off my dock permanently. The officer smiled. Understood. Jake towed Liberty home. As he backed her into place at his dock, a small crowd of neighbors watched, applauding softly. One even brought a six-pack. Welcome home, Liberty, he said. Jake grinned. Thanks. Feels good to be back. Karen's fate. News of Karen's arrest made local headlines. HOA president arrested for embezzlement and theft in Willow Shores. Boat theft leads to federal sting operation. Karen gets cuffed. Local HOA president faces decade in prison. Local talk radio loved it. Social media? Even better. Jake never commented publicly. He didn't gloat, didn't post on Facebook, and didn't give interviews. He let the story run its course. Karen, through her attorney, tried to negotiate a deal. She pleaded guilty to 4 charges in exchange for reduced sentencing. She was sentenced to 6 years in a minimum security federal prison, ordered to repay $275,000 in restitution, and banned from holding any administrative position in an HOA again. Jake sent her no letter, no message. He was done. Peace at last. One cool spring evening, Jake stood on his dock. The sun was setting again, casting warm orange rays over the lake. Liberty bobbed gently beside him, tethered as securely as ever. He sipped his coffee. Not because he needed the caffeine, just out of habit. He had spent most of his life surrounded by chaos, danger, and disorder. And yet, the pettiest war of all against a middle-aged suburban tyrant had felt like one of the strangest battles of his life. But it was over now. Behind him, the house that had once belonged to Karen sat empty, a dull for sale sign swaying in the breeze. Someone had written on it in permanent marker, as is, no clipboard included. Jake chuckled. Peace had returned to Willow Shores. No more warnings. No more fines. No more Karen. Just him, Liberty, and a quiet lake. 3 months had passed since Karen Blevins had been hauled away in cuffs, still screaming about bylaws and procedural violations as the FBI shut the door in her face. Willow Shores had changed in ways no one expected. And Jake? Jake had changed too, rebuilding quiet. The neighborhood was peaceful. There were no warning letters about non-compliant grass lengths, no threats about mailbox paint color, no more laminated notices zip-tied to trash cans demanding residents move them exactly 12 inches from the curb. Instead, people waved again. Kids played freely in yards without Karen circling like a suburban hawk. Neighbors greeted one another at the mailbox or while walking their dogs. Even the HOA meetings had become friendly potluck-style gatherings with coffee, cookies, and real conversations. Jake, for once, didn't feel like a target. He felt like part of community. And on his end, he made the conscious choice not to retreat into the lone wolf life he'd built after leaving the Navy. For the first time in years, he accepted a beer on a neighbor's porch. He even taught a few kids how to cast off the dock. Liberty's first voyage back. It was a warm Saturday morning when Jake finally took Liberty back out on the lake. He had scrubbed and waxed the night before, topped off the fuel, and double-checked every system. When he pulled her out onto the water, it felt like freedom, like justice in motion. The engine purred like a content cat as the boat cut cleanly across the still lake. Jake headed toward his favorite fishing cove on the far edge of Willow Lake, a peaceful spot shaded by trees where bluegill and bass swam thick. He dropped anchor, cast his line, and leaned back in the captain's chair. He wasn't out there just for the fish, though he wouldn't turn one down. He was out there because this was his place, his peace, the very thing Karen had tried to steal. And she failed. The bobber dipped. Jake grinned and reeled it in a healthy-sized bass. He released it gently, watching it dart away into the depths. A visit from the feds. That same evening, just as Jake finished coiling his lines and tying up Liberty, a black SUV pulled up to the curb by his driveway. It was Tony Maslin in person. Trim, sharp-eyed, same ex-military walk, like a guy who measured everything he did. Decided to swing through town, Tony said with a half-smile as Jake walked up. Jake laughed and gave him a hug. Could have warned me. I'd have thrown on a clean shirt. Then I had missed the steak. I'm assuming you're grilling tonight. Assuming correctly. Over steaks and cold beers on the porch. They talked about everything. The investigation, Karen's sentencing, and the bigger picture. You did good, Jake, Tony said at last. You think this was just about a boat, but it wasn't. You expose a network of shady practices that happens in hundreds of communities. People give up power to HOA boards without oversight, and this is what it can turn into. Jake took a long drink, then said, I just got tired of being pushed around. Felt like I was back in Afghanistan. Only instead of insurgents, it was covenants and clipboard checklists. Tony grinned. Same intensity, smaller explosions. Karen's last move. 1 week later. Jake received a letter in the mail. No return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, stiff loops, rimmed with way too much pressure. Karen, the letter was short. Just a few lines. You think you won. But you only embarrass yourself. That boat? I could have made it worth 10 of yours. Enjoy your victory. It's all you'll ever have. Jake stared at it for a moment, then folded it in half and tossed it in the fireplace. She still didn't get it. It had never been about revenge or status or neighborhood power. It had been about dignity, about standing up when someone thought they could take something, anything, just because they had the power to let her rot in minimum security, let her stew in her cell, and talk about bylaws to a bunkmate named Diane. Jake was free. A new HOA. The new HOA board, made up of 3 regular residents, called a town hall meeting 6 months after Karen's arrest. Jake didn't plan to attend, but curiosity got the better of him. The main room of the community center was filled again. The new president, a retired postal worker named Franklin Young, stood at the front with a stack of updated policy handouts. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we've overhauled the budget process. From now on, every line item will be posted online, and every decision will require community approval. People nodded, applauded, even. And we're bringing back something Willow Shores hasn't had in a long time, trust. He looked out at the room, then pointed at Jake in the back. And we have him to thank for that. Jake froze. People turned. Some clapped. A few gave him a thumbs up. He raised a hand. I didn't do it for applause. I just wanted my boat back. Franklin laughed. And you brought the neighborhood back with it. The legacy of liberty. That summer, Jake began offering short weekend fishing trips for neighborhood kids. Not for money. Just for the fun of it. He called it Liberty Days. Parents signed admission slips, and the kids showed up excited and jittery. Jake would teach them how to tie a proper knot, cast a line, and respect the lake. Some caught their first fish on Liberty. Some didn't catch anything, but still grinned the whole way back. One afternoon, a 10-year-old boy named Brandon tugged Jake's sleeve. Mr. Jake, he said, is it true your boat was stolen by the mean lady with the fake eyelashes? Jake smiled. It's true, but I got her back. Brandon nodded. Good. You fight like Batman. Jake laughed so hard, he nearly dropped the bait bucket. A final note. On the 1-year anniversary of Karen's arrest, Jake took Liberty out for a solo ride. The sky was clear. The water calm. He cut the engine in the middle of the lake and let her drift for a while. He thought of all that happened. The theft, the fury, the paperwork, the courtrooms, the neighbors, the agents, the laughs, the bitterness. And through it all, one truth remained. Some people abuse power because they think no one will stop them. But sometimes someone does. Someone who isn't afraid to go toe-to-toe with a clipboard tyrant. Someone who just wants peace and is willing to fight for it. Jake leaned back in his seat, arms behind his head, the sun warm on his face. "Here's to you, Liberty," he murmured. "May no one ever take you again." And she bobbed in reply.